In Barbados, we practice the Westminster system of government. The Prime Minister is the individual who commands the majority support in Parliament, while the leader of the opposition is chosen from among all other MPs who do not support the government. The role of the leader of the opposition is central to our style of government. That individual is the chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee and is also responsible for the selection of 2 opposition senators. As you are aware, the results of the last general elections showed the Barbados Labour Party winning all 30 seats, which meant that there was no leader of the opposition. Hello and welcome to Dr. George Belle Speaks. I'm Rashid Best. Thanks for joining us. The past 2 weeks have been quite eventful in Barbadian politics. In analyzing the development and placing them in perspective, Dr. George Belle begins by explaining the Westminster style of government practiced in Barbados.
The Westminster Model was designed to have a leader of the opposition. Even the physical layout of the house, even when we used to have the horseshoe-shaped thing, you still used to have people more or less on different sides. But if you look at the House of Commons, there actually is a divide between the two. And the government is on one side and the opposing parties are on the other side. So it is designed because in the British system, Westminster, that debate, that cross-talk, that cross-examination, all of that is to get you nearer to truth on the basis of that critical examination of each other. Some people think that to get consensus will bring you closer to truth. But there are other people that in the conflict and the discussion, in the critical discussion, that brings you closer to truth. So it's 2 different epistemological outlooks on how you get to truth. And the British system is one of seeking to argue it out and expose each other. And on the basis of that, you take away all the things that could inhibit your getting to where you should really go. The American thing tends to be more towards consensus, although it's not working right now in their reality, their present reality, which is why their system is so frustrated, because they are in fact supposed to go across the aisle and talk to each other and create caucuses all the time, which would come to various conclusions. Sometimes the Republicans and Democrats working together. You're not going to get that in Westminster. Okay? You actually have whips to stop people from coming together in that way. There was, prior to the development of mass parties in the 19th century, or the end of the 19th century, there was in the Westminster system a caucus system too. But even then, the caucuses then would be opposed to each other. You see? So that the tradition of conflict bringing about truth is well grounded in the culture of Westminster. So that lacking that, you tend to end up with a kind of shadowboxing problem, which is what our government has been, I would just say, has been impacted by over the last 2 sessions with the 30-love majorities. The absence of an opposition both causes some constitutional issues, because the system is designed to have the constitutional leader, like the Public Accounts Committee, and the way that we put people into the upper chamber and so on. So the lack of the opposition did impact us in relation to even I would say the quality of the debate, because fellows then had to imagine what might be the opposing view as distinct from hearing it, and the nuances and so on that will come out from presence, from interacting with another individual across the way. You can't get that when the person is absent. So they will have to wait now to hear what is happening outside of Parliament to get a picture of what alternative views they might have missed. So I think it diminishes your ability to spontaneously respond in the most comprehensive way in defending your case or seeing what might be the elements in the case that might be weak. Now, one of the first things that I saw that was problematic with people in relation to Mr. Thorne crossing the floor was these categories representative and delegate. In the Westminster system, the electoral system that usually goes with it, which is the first past the post, identifies individuals that in the election you select to go into Parliament. They are representatives. They're elected individually as representatives of a constituency. Now we know that in order to be successful in modern politics, that the political machinery has been constructed, which we call a party, to facilitate people of similar views going into Parliament, constituting a majority, and on that basis gaining the government, because the government is going to be determined by the individual who can say, I command the majority of persons in the House. They go to the head of state, and the head of state says, okay, you become my prime minister. But because the people, each individual is a representative, he's not a delegate. First of all, the Constitution doesn't even recognize parties. So you delegate of what? So he is a representative of his constituency and an individual. And that individual can decide, I support this today and I support that tomorrow. And therefore, on that basis, that individual can walk across the floor of Parliament. And there is nothing inconsistent with that and the Constitution that we have. All that's happened is that individual changed his mind. Now, we know why he changed his mind and so on. That's a different level now. Okay? And we might also know that if he changed his mind like that, he might not win his seat again because of another dynamic that happens outside of Parliament. But within Parliament, and how he is elected and how he is in there as a representative of that constituency, and he can cross the floor as a representative. If he was a delegate, he would have disobeyed his party instructions. And he can be recalled by the party then. And on that basis, we would say, in a system like that, you would have to have by-election. The fellow should resign. If you want to run again, let him run again. But he is no longer a delegate of that party. So therefore, his whole reason for existence in the Parliament has collapsed. And people bring those two things together and they're not the same. So a representative is much different from a delegate. So if you understand that distinction, then you have no difficulty with people crossing the floor, even if you don't like it. You don't like the fact that they cross the floor, and you have some suspicions about why they cross the floor, and you will probably vote against them because they cross the floor. But the fact is that as a representative of a constituency, they can cross the floor as an individual, and you can deal with them at the next election. I noticed that Mr. Thorne constantly said in his very early statements as he had crossed that he was not alone. And I believe that that was a signal that he knew that he would not have taken that position on the basis of his individual determination. His defense of himself in crossing the floor was very individual and very put on the basis of principles. I found this wrong with the government. I found this wrong with Barbados. I foresaw Barbados needing this. I saw this wrong with the Barbados Labour Party and so on. That was to justify why he crossed. But he also said, I am not alone. And that signaled to me that he was targeted. So in other words, you could look at a Parliament. This is other people that have political interests. And you could say, that guy there, he has sufficient issues, potential, that if you talk to him and negotiate with him in a certain way, he might serve the purpose of a movement across the floor, which would impact on the government. In this particular case, I believe that it would have impacted on the party that was targeting him. Now, the party that was targeting him, in my view, was the Democratic Labour Party, but not the Democratic Labour Party as the Democratic Labour Party. the Democratic Labour Party as factions. That there was a faction within the Democratic Labour Party that was targeting him. And they would have been targeting him because they had been involved in a competition within the party for leadership. And the people that I suspect targeted Mr. Thorne, and we can see it from the St. Michael Northwest constituency branch meeting that took place after he had sent in his application. The set of people that were there, the enthusiasm and the energy that was exhibited, it was almost like a celebration. And there was hugging and laughing and great exuberant behavior. Those people wanted him to do what he did. And I believe those people negotiated with him about doing what he did. This is how, on the basis of the behavior and observing it and knowing how people behave in politics and what is possible, and hearing somebody talk that was going on around the whole situation, that I concluded that he was targeted. And he alone also, he's saying himself that he was not alone. I believe he was briefed then on this. And essentially that Mr. Thorne was targeted in order to carry out a palace coup. And that might jump some people. You know, you can have a coup d'etat where you're trying to overthrow the whole state. You can have a palace coup in the sense of the bodyguard of a Roman emperor going against the emperor, or an organization how to get rid of a particular leader. Where they had a palace coup in England twice in recent times in the Conservative Party. So you can have a palace coup. And I think that there were people in the Democratic Labour Party wanting to get rid of Dr. Yarwood. And we know some of the reasons why they might have wanted to get rid of Dr. Yarwood. They didn't think that Dr. Yarwood carried the spirit of the Democratic Labour Party. That he essentially was, as I had used the term some months ago, he was an interloper. And that he was not able to hide very much why he came to the Democratic Labour Party, that he's a very ambitious fellow. And they might say that there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. But it meant that he used his political skill to capture the party, to advance himself as a leader. You know, he didn't come in and say, well, let me see if I can work to get a constituency or anything like that. There was a space that was available after the defeat in the second election. And when Verla de Pisa surrendered the leadership. And then Dr. Yarwood went into that space, and then he defended that space against people who you would associate with what they're calling the old guard. He represented people like Dr. Eswick and so on. And he had the political skill to defeat them. So they were blocked at that level in terms of taking what they would be seen as taking the party back for themselves. Especially in relation to Dr. Yarwood saying that he wanted a different kind of politics. But that different kind of politics was a clever formulation for that. He wanted a politics that served his interests. And there were some people in the party that went along with that view. And all that is fear in relation to what is possible. So Dr. Yarwood takes that position, but in taking that position, I think that he developed a faction, which was a successful faction in the context of the competition that was going on in the Democratic Labour Party for leadership, and which had the outcome of him being able to survive as political leader. Now, he was able to survive as political leader in a post that normally would not give political leadership, because the presidency of the party, according to the Constitution, is an administrative position. It's a powerful administrative position. And normally, from the history of the party, one would see that the political leader usually tries to control that at critical points in the operation of the party, because he knows that if a person gets in there who is opposed to him, that he could frustrate certain objectives. The question of how you select candidates, challenging positions that he might be taking. This went back, right back to Barrow, where Barrow was very conscious of that, but sometimes he was not president, but then he would, or let's say that I remember the big conflict between himself and Bramford Tate over the leadership of the party, you know, which Barrow won. So that then we have the later one between David Thompson and Maskell, and so on. So it is something that the Constitution says, yes, you can have a president and you can have a political leader. But when you have that, there's a possibility of conflict, unless you can bring the two things together. I think in the case of Maskell, he was in the Senate and they allowed him to be political leader, and then he went into the election and won the seat and so on. And then Thompson decided that he wanted to take back the leadership. And then the real politics of that was brought into play. So here you have Dr. Yearwood in a situation where there is no representative in Parliament, which had never happened before. And he's president. So he was able now to formulate for himself political leadership because he has the ambition and the goal to become a political leader in Barbados. So here is a party with this big gap at the top, and he has the skill to fill it. But in doing so, he is causing some dissatisfaction by some people that more represent the authenticity in the party in terms of political presence. And that is where I think we were at the point when Mr. Thorne is approached. You can use various types of language, and some people might not be comfortable with certain types of language. You can say that there's a set of people that are just dissatisfied with Dr. Yearwood. You could say that there were conspirators. You could say that there were people who were planning a coup, a palace coup. And I was not on the wall to observe what was going on and who was saying what. But as an observer outside, you could say palace coup. You could say conspiracy. You could say dissatisfaction with Dr. Yearwood. And then you could choose where to rest. But that is what is happening. And Mr. Thorne is targeted by people with a good eye in politics to say if he becomes leader of the opposition and then joins the party, he is political leader according to the Constitution of the Democratic Labour Party. Let me see if Dr. Yearwood could deal with that. And that is why I think at the beginning you saw a certain nervousness in the faction that was supporting Dr. Yearwood. And some people then decided to call that the party they were bungling. Now, I am not too impressed with the sophistication of certain people that are supporting Dr. Yearwood, but I don't think that they were bungling. I think they were very concerned with a problem that was in front of them that had a certain like political sophistication behind it. And the only way that they could survive it was by trying to match it with equal political sophistication. So that I believe that what happened, if we use other imagery, was an exquisite battle, like a 19th century sword battle that took place then between the two factions. The men turning and thing with the sword behind the back, and you know, what you call it, Zara? Okay, a Zara fight. Then it went on. And you know, in those fights where you take off the man head, you ain't even going to know the head off. You keep moving and the head gone, you know. But the thing is so, the motion is so exquisite that he's decapitated and he doesn't even know that he's decapitated. I've seen it in other places. They say that some of the most sophisticated battles of that type take place in universities. And I've seen in the university men take off other people's heads, and the fellas took a while to recognize that the head was disconnected from the body. So, but that is just nice flowery language and flowery imagery in order that that picture might go over to people, and that there is a difference in view again, just as there was, like, is it conspiracy, is it dissatisfaction, and so on. Here you have Is it bungling? Or was it a very difficult battle that had to be navigated? The smooth transition that is then asserted was possible, there was no smooth transition that could be possible, because that thing had to be resolved. Here, where it was a question of the political future of people. Here's a palace school. We then use that view, that category for convenience. And it had to be, if you want to survive that, you had to be able to defend against this palace school. And at the same time, you don't want the public to think that you got a battle to political death involved here, because that's bad optics for the party. So you want to say, we are trying to get a smooth transition. So these two images are going on at the same time. And therefore, I think people should appreciate that that was the level of the politics that was happening in Barbados. And most Barbadians ain't got time to sit down and think about that. We're not quarreling again. Okay? So I think this is what is happening. Now it is reinforced that Mr. Thorne, was it just on his own thinking, he put Ryan Walters in the Senate, who had run for St. Michael Northwest. Tricia Watson is more understandable as a useful possibility for the future. I think both of them brought some sense of political gravitas in terms of their potential ability to contribute to the politics of Barbados. They didn't come across as just people that were opportunists and might be here today and gone tomorrow. They looked like more committed people with skill. But Ryan Walters had run against Dr. Yarwood at some point and was seen by some people as a rival for Dr. Yarwood. Now, there is discussion that went on around these happenings, which said that the Dr. Yarwood faction did not want Ryan Walters to be in the Senate, and that Mr. Thorne had gone ahead and put Ryan Walters in the Senate along with Tricia Watts. That's her name, right? Yeah. And that, in fact, as the recognition that you had to continue negotiation, that a part of the demand from the Dr. Yarwood side was to take out Ryan Walters and put in Dr. Yarwood. And you would see that that would have been satisfactory for the Dr. Yarwood faction, but it would have been a defeat of the palace coup if that had happened. Because the full goal of the palace coup would have been to put enough political pressure on Dr. Yarwood to cause him to resign. To cause him to resign. And if he had resigned, the battle would have been won indirectly then, because he would have a new election, and if he resigned, he can come back and run again, and so on and so forth. So I think that that was a critical point as well. What do you do about the Senate? And it was the basis on which they would have to compromise, find a compromise. Now, the sophistication of the compromise is quite significant, because we also heard, and might be so, might not be so, that there was also a proposal to have a rotating Senate in terms of representatives, that you would put some people in for a certain period, another set of people in, another set of people. That would be serving Dr. Yarwood's interests as well. And it would be clumsy. That would have been clumsy. So the compromise that came out of that situation, which was quite interesting, but you had to listen to the language very carefully at the point when they had the press conference. You had to listen to the language very carefully. The authority of Mr. Thorne rests on the fact that he is political leader because he is leader of the opposition and has joined the Democratic Labour Party. he has the right to select 2 senators. They become the parliamentary group of the Democratic Labour Party. And the Constitution of the Democratic Labour Party recognizes a parliamentary group. And the leader of the opposition is the head of the parliamentary group. And he's political leader because of that. That gives Mr. Thorne authority and capacity for directing the Democratic Labour Party. If you look at the Constitution, in addition to policies in Parliament and so on, he can be asked to report to the Executive Council and the General Council. But the point is that he is leading, and certain things can only be changed in relation to what he is saying on the basis of an annual conference or something like that. But generally speaking, he is the political leader, as the Constitution says that. And it reduces the person that is president to an administrative position, which is still important and strategic, but he is not the political leader. And in relation to Dr. Yarwood's ambition, I think this was problematic. In that press conference, Dr. Yarwood said, "We have established a parliamentary caucus." And while people might have missed the word, that word was most significant for somebody that understands the Constitution and the politics of the word. A parliamentary caucus is not the parliamentary group. What he could do with the parliamentary group, what he could not do, he could do with the parliamentary caucus. And in the parliamentary caucus, he says, "I am in the parliamentary caucus. My shadow cabinet is in the parliamentary caucus." Immediately, the political leader in the House of Assembly is outnumbered. Now, there are some people that are in the shadow cabinet that could be a part of the parliamentary group on the basis of being former parliamentarians and so on. Not really parliamentary group, but they had been in the parliamentary group. But most of them are completely fresh people who have no parliamentary experience, but they are now going to be advisors within this parliamentary caucus, which is, in my view, a distinct category and structure from the parliamentary group. And that distinct category and structure is the political significance of that proposal and its sophistication. And we can only concede that if that came out of Dr. Yarwood's head, that was a critical instrument of victory for him in containing now Mr. Thorne and containing the people that were behind Mr. Thorne. And that becomes the compromise. And in that compromise, I think Dr. Yarwood has done quite well.
An analysis of the political events of the last week in Barbados by political scientist and retired Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Dr. George Belle. This has been Dr. George Belle Speaks. I'm Rashid Best. Thanks for your time.